Hi and welcome everyone, I'm Willem and this is a 1987 Porsche 928 S4 and today I'm going to review it. I'm going to start off the review by talking about the exterior of the car, have a look at the interior and then take it for a drive. If you enjoy my videos, I would really like to ask you to please subscribe to my channel, also click the like button below and also turn on the notifications for any alerts or updates on my channel. I would really appreciate that. This specific Porsche 928 S4 I borrowed from Club9 in Cape Town. They're situated on the corner of Strand and Breer Street. They offer a wide selection of cool cars and classic cars and sports cars like this one for sale. And they also have the in-house restaurant called Dapper, so if you're in the area, please do pop by. Launched in 1978, the Porsche 928 was actually introduced to replace the Porsche 911, as crazy as that might sound. Porsche at the time in the 70s thought that they weren't living up to their full potential at the time and thought that the 911 wasn't really a car that they can export to the rest of the market, specifically the American market as well. And they felt that they needed a more worldly car, something with a little bit more power, a little bit more of a GT car and a little bit more practicality as well as a bigger engine. Obviously it's 40 years later now and you know that didn't work. But it's actually crazy to think that the Porsche 928 was made for almost 20 years, from 1978 to 1994. So the looks of the Porsche 928 is really significant for me and it's a car that got me into cars in the first place. I remember being around 5 years old in the early 90s and finding an old car magazine in my granddad's closet with a Porsche 928 on the front page, a gold one. I can really remember it very, very vividly. And from then on my passion for cars really started and I can remember that. One of the things that caught my attention first were these frog style pop-up headlamps. Now in the 90s there were a lot of cars with headlamps that were filled up with a little piece of metal above them, and you know those classic pop-up style headlamps which looked really cool, but these ones were something completely different. I've never seen any cars like that, especially in the early 90s with these open style frog pop-up headlamps, and it's just the coolest thing to see them pop up and pop back down again. It's such an 80s thing and I really love it. So looking at the back of the car, you'll notice this beautiful Porsche engraving at the back here, a 928 S4. That engraving is really cool to me. You don't really see a lot of cars that do that anymore. Maybe the Ferrari F430 has that F430 engraving on the side mirror, but other than that you don't really see that anywhere. So looking at the taillights of the car, you'll notice they sort of wrap around the car, which adds to the nice round look of the Porsche 928. I think it works with this car and it makes it look even more rounder and more spaceship-like, and obviously that's the thing that Porsche was going for at the time. What you'll also notice on the back here is this wing that's on the Porsche 928 S4, obviously trying to create more downforce. I think it's also just to add to the look of the car and it makes it look a little bit more sporty. You'll also see a lot of glass panels on this car, which makes the interior feel nice and open and roomy. We'll get to it a little bit later. But I quite like all these glass panels and it also gives a very 70s and 80s feel to the car. The glass panel is obviously also part of the hatchback. This car is a hatchback, so you can lift it up and you have the boot area at the back. There's not a lot of space because the gearbox is mounted in the rear and the engine obviously in the front, but it is a 4-seater car and we'll take a look at the interior soon. So one of the coolest features for me, at least, of the Porsche 928 S4, these monoblock wheels. These monoblock wheels look really cool. That's something that you saw a lot in the 80s and early 90s, but obviously not much nowadays. I think some car manufacturers are reintroducing them again, backed by popular demand sort of. But these wheels are 16-inch. They look quite small compared to modern cars, but it works for this size of car, and the monoblock wheels really just does it for me. So the first thing you'll notice before stepping into the Porsche 928 is that it says 928 in the classic Porsche font, which is something you don't see in every car. And you'll also see that it's a 4-seater car. Now I've looked at that space and it looks a little bit narrow for a human being to fit in, so why not give it a try? Okay, so first thing I need to do is put the seat forward electrically, which sounds a little bit like electric toothbrush on the brink of dying. Put the seat forward. I can actually fit back here, which is quite crazy. I did not see that happening. I really thought I wouldn't be able to fit. Unless, yeah, there's no space in the front for a second person. So the space back here is really crazy. The funniest thing back here is that they actually put sun visors in the back. So I'm going to try and demonstrate for you. If I put the sun visor up, it's literally impossible for me to see anything and my neck is bending backwards. I have no idea why Porsche decided to put a sun visor in the back of the car. That's just really weird to me. So the interior of the Porsche 928 S4. If you're a type of person who knows Porsches, you know that everything is in the right place, all the lines are smooth, everything is where it needs to be, there's no unnecessary bits and pieces. The Porsche 928 S4 is a little bit different. There's a lot of quirks in this car, if I may use that word. dug the mirror. And there are buttons and things everywhere, which if you like this type of thing, you'd really like it and play around with it and stuff. The first thing you'll see obviously is this Porsche steering wheel, which is the steering wheel they did in the 944 and the Porsche ranges at that time. Specifically in the 1980s and 70s as well. I like the look of it. It's got this little gap in the middle here with the two parts and the openings, and with Porsche in the middle in that classic Porsche font, which looks really cool and minimalistic. In the front you'll see your gauges. This is one of the first Porsches, and I don't know old Porsches that good, that didn't have the rev counter in the middle. This had the speedometer on the left and the rev counter on the right, like most other cars do. It's got your oil temperature and stuff on the right there with your battery life, and on the left hand side your water temperature and your fuel gauge as well. So looking away from the instrument cluster, you'll notice all these little knobs and buttons around it, which are pretty funny. It looks like something out of a Fisher-Price toy. Obviously it's a very retro and 80s car, and this fits that character very well. The one at the top here is for your pop-up headlamps. You'll see two for the fog lights, and then you'll see one for your defroster as well. Now I just think it adds to the character of the car. Then looking at the door of the car, there's actually a lot going on in the door of the Porsche 928. You'll see your air vents are actually located on the door, which is something I don't think I've seen in any car before. And it looks like it's not really being able to point at you. Oh, I see, if you can change it around, it can actually point at you. And then one other cool thing you'll also see is this little storage area here at the right hand side. So there's a little clip that you push, and when you push it, you pull this thing back, and it sort of opens up a whole lot of storage space, which is really cool and typically classically German engineering. Then looking right next to the driver's seat, you'll see your handbrake here, which is something that was quite common in the 1780s, so that's not too strange. Looking at the center console of the car, it also gives you some more air vents at the top here. That's followed by your aircon and your climate control, which you can adjust here. Very much 70s and 80s, but everything still feels like in working order. You've got a newer radio at the bottom here, which the owner of the car obviously put in for himself, which makes sense. Obviously, you're not going to listen to cassettes in 2020. And then you've got something that is very cool to me, the gear shifter, or the automatic shifter here as well. I love this little rubber part at the bottom here. This just looks so retro and 80s. Then looking at the bottom here, you'll see some buttons. One button for your windows going up and down. Then one button that actually shows an arrow showing forward and an arrow showing backwards, which is quite strange. But if you press them, that is for the sunroof. Then moving down here, you'll see this little area for storage. You'd think, oh, maybe it goes down quite deep. It's a little bit of storage area. You can only open it from the passenger side for some reason. And there is very little storage. Yeah, you might fit a flat modern iPhone in here nowadays, but I think that's pretty much it. I think it's almost too thin for a wallet, so good luck trying to fit that in there. Also talking about the door, one thing that I didn't mention, which is very 70s and 80s, is this fur sort of lining at the bottom of the door. If you open it up, you can see there's blue fur running all the way on the door here, which is very crazy and pretty cool. That same fur continues down the whole of the car, and it's sort of lined the whole car with this blue fur-like material, which is just giving the car's age away, but also adds to this whole retro appeal of this car. Then to me personally, one of the best features in this car are these seats. These seats are really plush and comfortable. You can sort of see Porsche style seats certainly carried over to the modern times as well. They really know how to do sports seats. These seats are covered in leather, which is the 80s classic leather, and I really like the look of the car compared to modern leathers, and I think it lasts a lot longer as well. This car obviously being over 30 years old, but it's really comfortable. You also sit very nice and low in this car, which is the perfect driving position. I think Porsche perfected that back in the 60s already with the 911. So yeah. So that concludes my interior and exterior review of the car. Now it's time to take it for a drive. So the Porsche S4 name comes from the valves of the car. It's got 4 valves per cylinder, which is a little bit confusing, seeing that Porsches, or 911s at least, if it's a 4 or 4S, that's usually referred to being 4-wheel drive, and the S obviously being sport. So it is a little confusing to the name, but now you know what the S4 stands for at least. So talking about the specs of the Porsche 928 S4, this car has a 5-litre Porsche V8 engine, kicking out around 320 horsepower and around 430 Newton meters of torque, which was an absolute ton for the 1980s. I did a review on a Porsche Boxer Spider, the 987 version, a few weeks ago, which is a pure sports car, and that had the same horsepower output, to put it into perspective. So this got a 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in sub 6 seconds, which is really fast for a 1980s car, and it tops out at 270 kilometers per hour. The reason for this fast specs and the fact that they wanted the car to be faster than a Porsche 911 was meant for a market that can be taken or driven by any person. It's a car that you can take on the road, more meant for people to drive as a GT car, driving far, and which is also the reason this car is an automatic transmission. You could get this car in a manual transmission, but I think most people opted for the automatic because it was seen as a GT cruiser and it's meant to be easily driven by people, not take to the Nürburgring and race around a track or whatever. So I think the automatic version of this car suits this car very well. So I'm just waiting for a little bit of traffic to pass so we can see if we can hear that V8 engine. This is not a real loud car, but it does actually make a very, very nice noise. A very German V8 noise, obviously not an AMG noise, but very, very nice voice noise indeed. Listen. Wow. So this car feels like an actual piece of metal. When you open the door or clunk the door, it makes a chunk sound. And when you drive it, you can sort of feel where all that sounds and everything goes. It feels very planted on the road. I said before when I was doing the exterior review, this car has its gearbox planted in the back, and it's got the engine in the front for perfect 50-50 weight distribution. And when you start to feel that, if you go around corners a little bit and the handling, you can for sure definitely feel that you're sitting in the best position this car you could have. The corner coming up here, foot on the throttle. This car really feels nice and planted on the road, I have to say. Seeing that it is a GT cruiser car, it's something that you need to drive in a comfortable manner and you take for Sunday cruises and things like that, like we're doing now by the sea. It's very nice. And this is where the car comes into its element. It's something you want to cruise around with. It's not something you're going to push to the limit every day. But for the purpose of just cruising around with this car, it's so nice. The seats are extremely comfortable and it rides a lot softer than I would have anticipated for a car of this age actually. Another thing that you actually have to remember about this car is that this car won the European Car of the Year award back when it was released, which was a real prestigious award at the time. So to be honest, the Porsche 928 was never really going to replace the Porsche 911. Yes, the Porsche 928 had more practicality. Yes, it had more power. It was more of a world car and something you can drive every day. But the Porsche 911 is the staple car for Porsche. It's a lightweight sports car, the engine in the back, it's something you can drive every day and it's quite practical as well. But there's a good reason Porsche built the 928 for 20 years running. This car is easy to live with, it's easy to drive, it's fast, it still looks cool, it's got retro appeal as well. It's a car that's been built from the 70s up until the 90s. And for me, having driven it now for the first time, I'm really impressed by this car. I can really drive this car for weeks and weeks on end and not get tired of it. And I'm sure anyone else would feel the same way. Thanks for watching the review.